Murder in the Library is a story about what the title already suggested. It revolves around a mystery about the killing of a rich widow, Mildred Horsehair. Moreover, the mystery expands to another assault, however less severe, involving a vicar. And it is the team's job to solve the mystery.
Mrs. Horsehair, a rich widow in her 40s, confided with the vicar, Reverend Krulov, that she wanted to marry the young film director Oscar Oscarsson. The vicar congratulated her and approved of their marriage. However, Mrs. Horsehair is worried that this marriage might affect her son Geoffrey, who loves to gamble, saying that her son might disapprove their marriage because of the altering of her will in favor to her new husband. Vicar then advised Mrs. Horsehair to put her own interests first, and Mrs. Horsehair seems to be satisfied.
Around 7 o'clock, Mrs. Horsehair and her niece, Miss Daphne, seemed to have a fight, leaving Miss Daphne full of tears while running straight to her room, slamming the door after having a dispute with her aunt, Mrs. Horsehair. "If you marry him, you stupid old fool, I'll cast you off without a penny," was the words of despise coming out of Mrs. Horsehair's mouth, what seems to be the disapproval of her niece's marriage with young Archibald.
It was a normal evening. Mrs. Horsehair was hosting a dinner party as usual. The guests that attended the dinner that evening include Reverend Truelove, old Mr. Archibald and his son, Dame Christie. Then came along Mr. Oscarsson and his actress friend, Miss Topless. The party seems to be going so well. It was all yippee-yay. They had dinner, drinks, played the billiard, then boom! The old woman is dead. Mrs. Horsehair's lifeless body was soon to be discovered in her own mansion. At the same time, Geoffrey came in with the news that the vicar was found unconscious.
Following the tragic incident in the library where Mrs. Horsehair was murdered, we have gathered testimonies from 3 key witnesses: the butler, Velvet, the maid, Charlotte, and the vicar, Reverend. Let's break down how this mystery unfolded. From the 3 witness testimonies, the team concluded that Geoffrey was the one who assaulted the vicar when he went for a stroll and a smoke in the grounds. From the vicar's testimony, the last thing the vicar saw before blacking out was a flash of something blue, and Geoffrey was wearing a dark blue smoking jacket when he took off his formal dinner jacket. The vicar also said that he was hit with something heavy, which the team strongly believed that he was hit with a large silver candlestick that was missing from the library. The missing candlestick was mentioned in the butler's testimony. "I noticed that one of the large silver candlesticks was missing." Furthermore, the butler also stated in a previous sentence, "And I can't help but notice that the ashtray was full with cigarette stubs, the kind that Geoffrey always smokes," further implying that Geoffrey was the one who took the candlestick with him. We believe with evidence from the vicar and maid's testimony that the reason and motivation for this assault was because the vicar gave advice to Mrs. Horsehair about her marriage with Oscar Oscarsson, which would have affected Geoffrey. The maid also mentioned that Geoffrey is a gambling addict. We concluded that his motive was also because he was worried about not getting the will and struck the vicar for encouraging the marriage.
On the other hand, the killing of Mrs. Horsehair was more complicated than the assault on the vicar. But the team still managed to break down the witness testimonies to figure out the murderer. First up, we've got Velvet, the butler. He claims that he was staying in the kitchen at the time of the accident. His story was,
I stayed in the kitchen until 10 p.m. until I heard a scream coming from the hall. I came rushing out to see Charlotte, the maid with a tray in her hand. She gasped, "The library," and fainted. I came in the library to see Miss Horsehair lying on the ground. I saw the pot decanter lying smashed on the floor, and there was broken glass everywhere. From this, we could conclude that Miss Horsehair was killed by getting struck in the head with a pot decanter.
This port decanter was the same one that Jeffrey took from the butler and brought it to the library to do his quote-unquote letter. After many more thorough breakdowns of the testimonies, the team has come to a conclusion that the murder of Miss Horsehair was done by none other than Miss Daphne and young Archibald. Evidence 1. Miss Daphne and young Archibald were in the conservatory during the time of the murder. From the butler's testimony, we could see that they were in the conservatory from 9:30 p.m. They were also the ones closest to the library, yet they didn't hear the piercing scream and only came when the butler called out for help. Team saw this as a vulnerability in their case and believe that they are the ones who committed the murder. We also believe that the motive of this murder was because Mrs. Horsehair did not approve of the marriage of Miss Daphne and young Archibald. The maid stated in her testimony that she heard an argument from Mrs. Horsehair and Miss Daphne earlier that evening, causing Miss Daphne to storm out and leave the room in tears. We also see that young Archibald was not too happy about this news, as stated in the butler's testimony. Miss Daphne looked as if she had been crying, and after she had spoken a few words to young Mr. Archibald in the hall, that young gentleman looked pretty unhappy too. This concludes our findings. The team strongly believe that the pair was guilty in the murder of Mrs. Horsehair due to her not approving their marriage, whereas Jeffrey is guilty as the perpetrator in the vicar's aggravated assault and aggression because of the vicar's advice to Mrs. Horsehair.